Good morning. Welcome to Unity in Manhattan, and thank you very much for inviting me to be here this morning to share with you. Happy Valentine's Day. I have a friend in California who is a musician, and he plays guitar. And when he was just beginning his profession, he was a bit discouraged because things were kind of slow to take off for him. So he decided that what he would do was go play his music at the nursing homes that were nearby. And he shared with me how it was when he first started doing this. He would sit on a stool right in front of the nurses and attendants would go get the residents and they'd bring them out. And he'd sit on the stool and he would begin to worry about whether or not they'd like his music, like his approach, his style. And one of the residents at this particular nursing home made him feel at ease when she piped up, "Don't worry about it, Sonny." His name is Bill. "Play anything. We're here for the love." I'm here for the love this morning, and I hope that you are too. Let me start out by sharing, for those who might be a little confused about this, that Jesus was not a Christian. Jesus, whom we consider our master teacher here in Unity, was Jewish. He was raised and brought up in the Jewish faith. And there are some 613 spiritual laws which are a part of the Jewish tradition. Their religious leaders, the Sadducees and Pharisees, believed that in order to receive God's favor, they had to know these laws, really know them, and they had to practice them to the letter. And this is why in the Bible we have Jesus criticizing the Pharisees, because he felt that too much attention was being placed on their trying to follow the letter of the law. And they were missing the love and the compassion and the charity which those laws were supposed to direct them to. And one day when Jesus was out teaching, one of the Pharisees decided to test him. So the Pharisee came to Jesus and asked the question, "Teacher," he said, "which is the great commandment in the law?" And Jesus responded, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment, and the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets." Well, Jesus was basically saying to this Pharisee and to the other listeners that, hey, you don't have to worry about following 613 spiritual laws. As long as you know the most important one is to love God with your heart, with your mind, with your soul. And on this rest all of the other laws. And the second important one is to being able to love our neighbors. But this one is kind of predicated on a third one, which is that we do learn to love ourselves. And that is what enables us to love our neighbors. So there are three laws: loving God, loving ourselves, and third, loving our neighbors. And I think that loving God it's really a basic instinct. It's a natural part of us, even when we don't call it loving God. Because I believe that everyone has some belief in something that's beyond themselves. There's something in everyone, I think, who believes in love, believes in charity, believes in sharing goodwill, believes that there is something more to life. And I call this loving God. So how do we even begin to define love? In his spiritual dictionary, The Revealing Word, Unity co-founder Charles Fillmore explains, love, he writes, is the pure essence of being that is in divine mind. And this pure essence of being draws together in love and harmony everyone and everything that is. This love is not a personal love. It loves simply for the sake of loving. It's like the sun that shines for the joy of shining. He wrote, "Love is an inner quality that sees good everywhere, and it insists that all there is good, by refusing to see anything else. And when it does this, the love that refuses to see anything else but good, it brings that quality out in whatever it beholds." Whenever we call on God, the Holy Spirit, for health, for prosperity, for guidance, for understanding, we're calling on love, divine love in our lives. Last month, when I was here at Unity to share the Burning Bowl service and the Letters to God, the White Stone service, I was assisted on the platform by John Powers. And John was delightful. And let me apologize right now, John, okay, because I'm going to share something. The only thing was that when John was doing the announcements, okay, and he was talking about this upcoming series, you remember? Okay. And when he spoke the title of today's talk, instead of saying how to love God, he said it's how to leave God. And he quickly realized his error and fixed that, but not before a light bulb went ping in my consciousness, and the hair that my razor hadn't taken off my arm stood straight up. Because this was the truth. I caught it. It says, we must leave God to love God. You may not believe me, but before we're done, I think you will. So, John, thank you for that mistake. When Jesus was beginning his ministry and he went out to call his disciples, we read in the Bible that he was walking along the Sea of Galilee and he saw two sets of brothers. He saw Peter and James excuse me. I've gotten ahead of myself. He saw James and John, Peter and Andrew, and James and John. And all of these guys were out on their boats working with their nets. Jesus told them to leave the nets and follow me, which they did immediately. They left their old life behind to follow Jesus. The story of the prodigal son that Jesus shares is about a son who leaves home looking for his treasure out in the world. And he has to come into experience of want before he realizes that his treasure, the love he's seeking out there, is at home, at the home within us, the home in our heart. The rich young man who went to Jesus said, what do I need to do to follow you? And Jesus said, well, you have to give up all that stuff you've got. Okay? Give away your riches to the poor. And he left feeling sad because he was not willing to let go and to leave those things behind. So I'd like to share a story with you that I think illustrates just what John pointed out. And that is that we have to leave God in order to love God. This is the story of Mr. Smith, and you may be familiar with it. There was a flood in his small town, and Mr. Smith got caught in this. The water had begun to rise up inside his house, and he began to pray earnestly that God would take care of things. And the water continued to rise. And after a while, a man came by in a rowboat, and he called out to Mr. Smith, "Come on, jump in, and I'll take you to safety." And Mr. Smith said, "Oh, no thanks. I believe in God. I'm praying. God will save me." And so the rower left to help other people. And Mr. Smith kept praying, and pretty soon after this, a motorboat came by. And the guy said, "Come on, I'll take you." And Mr. Smith said, No, thank you. God will save me." And the motorboat went on, and the waters kept rising and rising, and soon Mr. Smith had to go to the roof of his house in order to not get washed away in the water. And while he was up there on the roof of his house, a helicopter came by, and it was hovering overhead, and it dropped down one of those ladders that they have, and the guy in the helicopter yelled out, Come on, climb up, okay, and I'll take you to where it's safe. And Mr. Smith replied, oh no, thank you, but I don't need your help, okay? I believe in God, I have faith, and I know that God will save me. So the helicopter rolls back up the ladder and he moves on. Well, Mr. Smith drowns. And he is feeling very, very vexed about this whole situation. And when he gets an opportunity, he talks to God. And he says, I had faith in you. I prayed. And I just knew that you would save me. And you didn't. And I don't understand why you didn't. And God shakes his head and says, well, I sent you a rowboat. I sent you a motorboat. I sent you a helicopter. I think sometimes we have a limited concept of what divine love is. And it keeps us from experiencing greater love, the love that is there for us. Leaving God to love God. To me, this means being able to open ourselves to spiritual upgrades. My computer at home, sometimes when I am hitting the button to turn it off, a little message comes up on the screen that says, do not shut down Windows. Installation of programs is going on. And so I wait and I go back and shut it down later. Well, the windows are heart and mind in us. And the message of remembering not to close down our windows because we're experiencing a spiritual upgrade is an important one. Being open to spiritual upgrades is important. Our understanding of what God is an organic process. It grows and expands as we grow spiritually. Truly, the main thing that we have to leave behind is whatever separates us from, or seeming separates us from, the love of God. I love how the Unity minister and writer, the late Unity minister Eric Butterworth, describes this adventure that we're on to understand God and to know what our relationship is with divine love. He writes, you are about to embark on an adventure into an inner world of mind and spirit. It could be the most important journey in consciousness that you have ever taken. It should be inspiring. It is intended to be challenging. You may also find it disturbing. If you have a fixed belief about the reality of life, a custom-made set of convictions, then you may want to turn back, for your every view will be challenged. Your whole world will be turned upside down and inside out. But in the end, if you keep on until you catch on, you will gain a new perspective of life, and it will lead you to a new experience in living. So for me, loving God is this adventure when I stop doing stuff, when I leave off stuff, when I stop being afraid, when I stop holding a grudge against someone. Loving God is something that I experience when I'm not beating myself up or for mistakes that I've made, for things that I've thought or done which have hurt other people or have hurt myself. Loving God, to me, is what happens when I leave the thought that I have not earned God's love, or that I am too insignificant to make a difference in the lives of others around me. The writer-monk Thomas Merton had a great insight about this. He said, we need to learn how to let go. In his book, Thoughts in Solitude, he wrote, we cannot see things in perspective until we cease to hug them to our bosom. When we let go of them, we begin to appreciate them as they are. Now, Merton is talking about attachments that we have. And yes, the attachments to material things like cars and boats and fine houses and clothes and 100 pairs of shoes or 1,000 books, our mental and emotional baggage, our limiting beliefs and attitudes. Mr. Smith was hugging his outdated understanding of God's love so tightly that it limited his ability to experience that love? What misbeliefs or misunderstandings about God, about yourself and your relation to God, might you be holding too tightly? I must admit that there are times in my life when I would feel a sense of loss, when it would seem as though good or God was not present in my life, kind of like God was missing in action in my experience. Kind of like this story that I'm going to share with you. It's a story about two little boys, one 8-year-old and then a 10-year-old. And these little guys, they were a terror, to be honest with you. Their parents were beside themselves because they were constantly getting into trouble. Whatever it was, they did it. And they had heard or understood that there was a new pastor in their town, and this pastor was very good at talking to children and getting them to understand what parents had difficulty getting through with. And so they made an appointment for their little boys to speak to this pastor. The pastor decided that he wanted to speak to them one at a time, and so the 8-year-old, he wasn't exactly volunteered to go first, but he was chosen to go first. The clergyman had the boy sit down in a chair, and he was comfortable, and he asked the boy, "Where is God?" And the little boy, he didn't know how to respond, and so he said nothing. And the pastor then raised his voice a little bit more and said, "Where is God?" And once again, the 8-year-old made no response. And so this last time, the pastor raised his voice even more and deepened that tone, and he shook his finger in the boy's face and said, "Where is God?" And at that, the little boy jumped up and ran out and ran all the way home. He got home and he slammed himself in the closet. His brother, the older brother, saw him and entered the closet with him and said, What happened?" And the little boy said, "We are in big trouble. God is missing, and they think we did it." I think it is very true. When it seems that God is missing in action from our life experience, we did do it. Those times when we feel that good is absent, when we feel that peace of mind or joy have left the scene of our experience, we did that. It wasn't that God is missing from our life. It's we who are missing from the life of God. When we love something or someone, we look forward to spending time with them. We treasure that experience. We look forward to it. We make room in our hearts and in our lives for the one we love. We want to share ourselves with them. And we don't place limits on the love that is between us. How do we love God? The same way. Remembering to spend time with God. Remember to value this presence that indwells you, that empowers you for all kinds of exciting and wonderful things to experience in life. Remember to make room in your home, that is in your consciousness, for God. By trusting it and not putting limitations on how God's love can express for you and through you, you stay open and you experience this love. When we quit trying to follow all 613 spiritual laws that we have created for ourselves, then we can experience this presence. In closing, I'd like to share an insight from the Bible, which is told in the 3rd chapter of Matthew, as Jesus was just beginning his ministry. In particular, verse 16 and 17. John the Baptist was out all day. He was baptizing people in the river Jordan, and Jesus comes to be baptized of John. And John sees him, okay, and right away his feeling is, no, you should baptize me. And Jesus has to work hard to convince him to baptize. Anyway, John does baptize Jesus, and the story tells us that when he came up out of the water, the heavens opened, light beamed down, and he heard this voice that said, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." The thing to note and the insight here is that this was before Jesus ever did anything. He hadn't preached a sermon, he hadn't taught a lesson, he hadn't healed anyone, he hadn't raised anyone from the dead. The voice was what Jesus heard, that love of God saying to him, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." We are the beloved of God, in whom God is well pleased. We have but to open ourselves to experience this. So how do we love God? Be loved. Call timeouts in your day regularly to spend time in this presence. Someone wrote that you can spend an entire lifetime working and trying to be one with the Great Spirit, or you can focus on love and realize that you already are. Thank you. Next Sunday, we will talk about a process which many of us find even more difficult, and that is loving ourselves. God bless you.